What happens when 49,000 Chinese-made EVs meet prairie canola and Ottawa's auto jobs hang in the balance? Quick Ottawa check-in. Expect snow today with temperatures around -5 Celsius, a high near -1, and a low around -12. Canada's new deal with China is the headline maker. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has struck a trade agreement that lowers tariffs on up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles entering Canada to 6.1%, down from a previous 100%. In return, China will slash duties on Canadian agriculture, think canola dropping from 84% to 15%, and eliminate tariffs on canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas from March through at least the end of 2026. Reactions are mixed, and for good reason. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford and auto industry groups are warning that cheaper Chinese EVs could undercut domestic jobs and investments across the manufacturing corridor that runs right up the 401 and into Ottawa's own supplier ecosystem. Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe is applauding the move for giving farmers a crucial break in one of Canada's highest-value export chains. Politically, the deal signals a sharp pivot. A Beijing visit by a Canadian Prime Minister seemed unlikely not long ago, given strained relations over the Meng Wanzhou case and interference allegations. Carney's bet is that diversifying trade eases pressure from U.S. tariffs and rebuilds a pragmatic working relationship with the world's second-largest economy. South of the border, the response is split. President Donald Trump called the deal a good thing and backed Carney's decision. But U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and other officials cautioned Canada may regret it, especially if a flood of low-cost EVs reshapes our market and supply chains. Notably, Greer also said he doesn't expect American car exports to Canada to be affected by this specific deal. Still, it lands as U.S.-Canada ties are already strained by tariff disputes, and with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement heading into its 6-year review cycle. A top U.S. diplomat speaking in Kamloops flagged that both countries are now openly courting trade with China. For Ottawa policy watchers, that's the new normal: align where we can with Washington, compete where we must, and hedge with diversification. Public health is also in the cross-border spotlight. In Washington, newly appointed U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has influenced a reduction in the U.S. childhood immunization schedule, moving several vaccines, flu, COVID-19, hepatitis, meningococcal disease, and rotavirus, from routine to optional. Canadian experts worry that U.S. policy shifts ricochet into our discourse, fueling hesitancy here at home. Ontario pediatricians warn that dialing back routine coverage risks the return of illnesses many of us haven't seen in years, along with preventable hospitalizations. As always, your best guide is your local public health unit and family doctor. What happens in the U.S. tends to spill across the border, but Canadian recommendations are set here based on our own evidence. On national security, B'nai B'rith Canada is urging Ottawa to list 3 overseas branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, its Lebanese, Egyptian, and Jordanian chapters, as terrorist entities, alleging they financed Hamas operations. The organization has launched a public letter-writing campaign and appealed directly to the Minister of Public Safety, pointing to recent U.S. designations of these chapters as independent terrorist organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood originated in Egypt and is banned in multiple Arab states. Any Canadian move to list its foreign branches would carry diplomatic and legal implications, so watch this space for a careful case-by-case evaluation by the government. Zooming out, 2 new analyses cut through the fog on democracy and influence. First, despite years of warnings about fraying trust, Canadian satisfaction with democracy has held relatively steady over the last 15 years. Confidence in our elections and the Supreme Court remains higher than in the U.S., even as distrust in mass media keeps climbing. Second, researchers argue that some foreign governments found unconventional leverage in Washington by directly enriching the Trump family through gifts, business deals, and even crypto-linked investments to shape policy outcomes. Examples flagged include the UAE and Pakistan. Whether you see this as a cautionary tale or realpolitik, it's a reminder that ethics rules, transparency, and strong institutions matter, for them and for us. Let's skate over to the senators. Defenseman Thomas Chabot underscored the next-man-up mentality ahead of tonight's tilt with the Canadians, noting that when Linus wasn't available, Levy stepped in and was great. That resiliency will be crucial because the bigger story is about timing. The Sens core is entering its prime right now. Yet gaps remain: depth on defense, secondary scoring consistency, special teams execution, and President of Hockey Operations Steve Staios faces a tightrope with limited trade assets. The message between the lines: incremental fixes may not be enough. If Ottawa's going to surge, bolder roster moves, or a system tweak that unlocks more from what they've got, may need to come sooner rather than later. Around the league, the Red Wings beat the Sharks 4-2. Dylan Larkin had the tiebreaker early in the third, Lucas Raymond notched 3 assists, and Alex DeBrincat hit goal number 25. It's a reminder that the wild card math in the East won't wait for the Senators. Points are being banked nightly. On the climate and environment beat, a set of studies from Simon Fraser University paints a troubling picture for Pacific salmon. Since Canada's wild salmon policy launched 20 years ago, monitoring of salmon spawning populations has dropped 32%. Today, roughly 44% of Pacific salmon populations lack adequate assessments, and sockeye are in the worst shape on the data front. 58% of their conservation units don't have sufficient monitoring. Without reliable public data, it's tough to set sustainable catch limits or decide when to close fisheries. Researchers also note this monitoring decline parallels federal moves to speed up industrial projects while easing certain environmental oversight steps. For a changing climate, warmer rivers, shifting ocean conditions, and habitat stress, that's precisely when you need more information, not less. If you care about healthy salmon runs, the unglamorous budget lines for monitoring and science are where the next big wins may come from. Before we go, back to that EV agriculture deal. For Ottawa listeners, there are 2 practical questions to watch. First, how many of those 49,000 EVs actually make it here, and at what price points relative to domestic and North American models? That will determine pressure on local suppliers and dealerships. Second, do the farm tariff cuts translate into measurable gains for Canadian exporters quickly enough to justify the political cost? If canola shipments ramp up while the auto sector holds steady, Carney's gamble looks savvy. If not, expect louder calls to revisit the terms or add safeguards. That's it for today. Snow, a daytime high around -1 Celsius, and a big divisional showdown as the Sens look to make a statement against Montreal. We'll be watching the blue line matchups and who steps up if depth is tested again. Thanks for listening. Follow or subscribe, and send us your questions for next week's mailbag. We'll dig into SUSMA's 6-year review and what it could mean for Ottawa's economy.